Zendaya had always been known for her grace, talent, and poise under pressure. From her early days on Disney Channel to walking red carpets at the world's most prestigious award shows, she carried herself with a quiet strength that made her stand out. But what the world didn't know was that behind the glamour and flashing lights, she held something even deeper, an unshakable faith that kept her grounded to the storm of Hollywood. It wasn't a detail often captured in headlines. Zendaya wasn't loud about her beliefs, nor did she try to preach or push them on others. But tucked beneath her outfits, designer gowns, casual sweats, rehearsal gear, was always one small, simple symbol that rarely left her side, a silver cross necklace that once belonged to her grandmother. She wore it not for show, but for what it meant, for the strength it gave her before every audition, for the peace it brought during the chaos of her schedule, for the memory of the prayers whispered by her grandmother on long, quiet nights. The cross was never meant to be a statement. It was personal, sacred. So when she landed a role in a high-budget, highly anticipated drama film, one that could potentially earn her another major award nomination, Zendaya was ecstatic. The script was powerful, the cast exceptional, and the director, Thomas Keller, was known for pushing the boundaries of modern cinema. From the first day on set, everything seemed perfect. Zendaya had immersed herself into her character. The chemistry with her co-stars was natural, and the crew admired her professionalism. But then came a costume fitting that would quietly unravel into something much bigger. She had walked into the wardrobe trailer like any other day, sipping her coffee, humming to herself. The stylist, a kind woman named Carla, greeted her warmly. "Morning, Z. We're finalizing the look for scene 23, the courtroom scene. Just one note from Keller." Zendaya smiled, stepping onto the platform to change. "Sure. What's the note?" Carla hesitated. "He wants everything clean. No jewelry at all, especially religious symbols." Zendaya paused. She looked down at the cross resting against her collarbone, then looked back up at Carla. "He said that specifically?" Carla nodded, clearly uncomfortable. "I think it's about keeping the focus on the dialogue. He wants nothing distracting." Zendaya's heart sank a little, not because she feared confrontation, but because she felt that all too familiar tension rise inside her, that subtle pressure to conform, to silence parts of yourself for the sake of art, image, or someone else's vision. She thanked Carla and stepped outside, needing a moment. The sun was bright that morning, casting long shadows across the studio lot. She stood quietly, fingers tracing the tiny cross as thoughts swirled in her mind. Should she let it go? Was it worth pushing back? Would it really matter in the grand scheme of things? But as she stood there, the voice of her grandmother came back to her, soft, steady, full of conviction. "Never be ashamed of what keeps your soul alive, baby." That was all she needed. Zendaya walked straight to the director's tent. She found Keller talking with the cinematographer, animatedly explaining a lighting setup. She waited for a pause, then stepped forward calmly. "Hey, can we talk about the cross?" Keller turned, caught off guard. "What about it?" "I'd like to keep wearing it in the scene," she said plainly. "It's not flashy. It's not meant to distract. It's just part of me." There was a beat of silence. Keller's face didn't harden, but it didn't soften either. "Zendaya, I respect your beliefs, truly, but this is a courtroom scene. It needs to be stark, stripped down. Symbolism, especially religious, pulls focus. It changes the tone." "I understand that," she said, "but this cross isn't about tone. It's about truth. And for this character, for me, it belongs there." Keller exhaled, clearly uncomfortable. "Let me think about it." She nodded politely. "I'd appreciate that." She left without raising her voice, without causing a scene. But news, as it always does in Hollywood, had a way of slipping through cracks. By that afternoon, whispers about Zendaya pushing back were already circling among crew members. Some admired her conviction. Others thought she was being difficult. But she didn't care. She had planted her feet in something she believed in. What no one knew, not even Zendaya, was that this small moment was about to spark a wave much larger than she could have ever imagined. Because the next day on set, something happened that would shake everyone in the world to their core. Zendaya arrived on set the next morning with the same calm demeanor she always carried. No bodyguards, no entourage, no drama. Just her usual cup of herbal tea, a hoodie pulled over her head, and that same silver cross resting gently against her skin. No one said much at first. The crew exchanged glances. A few whispered to each other. Even Carla, the stylist, avoided eye contact as she handed Zendaya the updated wardrobe for the day. But Zendaya didn't flinch. She quietly put on the outfit, leaving the cross exactly where it was. Visible, centered, unmoved. She wasn't trying to make a scene. She wasn't rebelling. She was simply existing, as she always had. But this time, with just enough resistance to make others uncomfortable. Scene 23 was scheduled for 10:30 a.m. By 10:20, the courtroom set was buzzing with energy. Cameras were mounted, lights adjusted, extras in place. Zendaya's co-stars rehearsed lines in corners, while Keller paced behind the monitors, reviewing the shot list. When Zendaya walked onto set, cross and all, silence fell. Keller looked up. She felt the weight of his stare, the tension between them like static in the air. Still, she walked to her mark, stood tall, and waited for direction like a true professional. Keller approached her slowly. "You're still wearing it," he said, voice low. "I am," she replied softly. He looked at her, eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with curiosity. There was something in the way she held herself, unwavering, yet peaceful. A quiet kind of strength that demanded no explanation. He sighed, turning away. "Roll sound," he called out. The assistant director blinked. "Rolling. Rolling." Scene 23, take 1. The clapperboard echoed. Snap. Action. Zendaya delivered her lines flawlessly. The scene was tense. Her character was a defense attorney arguing for a wrongfully accused teenager. Her words cut to the room with fire, conviction, and depth. The presence of the cross didn't distract. It added something real, something human. It anchored her. When Keller called cut, the room was still. Even the crew, usually quick to reset or chatter, stayed quiet for a moment. He looked at her again, this time differently. But before he could say anything, a voice rang out from behind the monitor setup. "I think you should keep it." Everyone turned. It was Janet Dawson, the executive producer. Janet rarely visited the set. She trusted Keller. But today, she had dropped by unannounced, curious about the cross incident she'd heard whispers about. Keller raised an eyebrow. "You think so?" Janet nodded. "I've watched hundreds of courtroom scenes. This one, that cross made it honest. It felt like she believed in something more than just a case." Keller didn't respond immediately. He glanced at Zendaya again, who, to her credit, didn't gloat, didn't smile. She simply stood, open and patient. "All right," Keller finally said. "Keep it." A wave of quiet approval moved through the set. Carla looked relieved. The crew exhaled. But that was just the beginning. Later that evening, a behind-the-scenes photo was posted to the film's official Instagram. Zendaya standing in the courtroom set mid-scene, eyes locked on her co-star, the silver cross clearly visible on her chest. The caption was innocent. "Scene 23 in the making. Zendaya brings a heat." But the comment section? It lit up like wildfire. Fans noticed the cross immediately. Some praised her. Finally, someone in Hollywood standing up for their faith. This is why I love Zendaya. Class and conviction. Others were critical. Why bring religion into everything? Thought this was a legal drama, not Sunday school. Within hours, the photo was shared across Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. Christian influencers praised her. Conservative voices called it a bold stand. News outlets picked it up. Zendaya sparks controversy by wearing cross on set. And somewhere in all the noise, Zendaya sat in her trailer, quietly reading her grandmother's worn Bible. She hadn't asked for any of this. She hadn't made a statement. She just stayed true to herself. By morning, she was trending nationwide. By the time the sun rose the next day, Zendaya's name was everywhere. Cable news shows debated the issue over early morning coffee. Some anchors praised her bravery. Others questioned whether personal beliefs should be displayed on set. Online forums buzzed with opinion pieces, and hashtags like hashtag ZendayaCross and hashtag FaithOnSet trended across platforms. What began as a quiet personal decision had become a national conversation. Zendaya, however, remained silent. She didn't post. She didn't tweet. She didn't respond to the waves of both praise and criticism. Instead, she showed up to work as she always did, on time, prepared, professional. She wasn't there for attention. She was there to act, to tell a story. But now, whether she wanted it or not, she had become the story. Inside the studio, tension simmered beneath the surface. Some crew members kept their distance, unsure where they stood. A few actors made awkward comments in passing, jokes laced with discomfort. But others, quietly and respectfully, offered support. One young camera assistant left a note in her trailer that simply read, "Thanks for standing firm." During filming that day, the energy on set felt different. The scenes moved slower. People were distracted. Even the director, Keller, seemed off his rhythm. Midway through a take, he called for an unscheduled break and disappeared behind the stage. Zendaya stayed seated on set, waiting for instructions. That's when Janet Dawson approached her. The executive producer rarely had personal conversations with cast members, but this moment felt different. Janet sat beside Zendaya in the empty courtroom set. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she studied her, the way she sat, composed, cross-visible and untouched. "You're handling this with a lot of grace," Janet finally said. Zendaya looked at her, eyes calm but tired. "I didn't mean for it to become a thing." Janet nodded. "I know, but the thing is, when someone in your position stands for something, even quietly, people notice, and they react. Some follow, some fight. I didn't do it for them," Zendaya replied. "I did it for me, and for her." She touched the cross gently. Janet smiled. "It shows." There was a pause. Then Janet added, "You're doing more than just acting in this film. Whether you know it or not, you're leading." That word stayed with Zendaya the rest of the day. Leading. She hadn't asked to lead. She hadn't signed up to be a symbol or a statement. But maybe that's how it worked. Maybe sometimes you didn't get to choose the moments that defined you. You only got to choose how you stood inside them. Later that week, a surprise arrived at the studio. A letter, handwritten, delivered with no return address. Zendaya opened it alone in her trailer. The handwriting was shaky, but clear. It was from a woman named Evelyn, a retired schoolteacher from Kansas. She had seen the story online, watched the clips, read the headlines, and she wanted to say thank you. Evelyn wrote about her own journey with faith, how she had once been asked to remove a small gold cross during a school photo, how she hadn't stood up for herself then, how she had lived with that quiet regret for decades. "You reminded me," the letter read, "that it's never too late to stand up, even in silence, even in stillness. You reminded me that we don't have to be loud to be strong." Zendaya folded the letter slowly. She placed it in her bag, next to her grandmother's Bible. In the chaos of everything swirling around her, she had found something steady, not in the noise, but in the quiet, not in the headlines, but in the honesty. What started as a personal choice was now resonating in places she couldn't see, with people she would never meet. And yet, behind all the noise and attention, the storm was still building, because someone, somewhere, didn't like what she represented, and they were about to make that known in a very public way. It started with an email. Zendaya was sitting in her trailer between takes when her assistant knocked gently on the door, holding a tablet. Her expression was concerned but composed. "You should see this," she said. The email had come from the studio's legal department. Polite, formal, and wrapped in carefully chosen language, it informed Zendaya that the studio had received multiple concerns about her visible display of religious symbols during filming. It cited potential issues with audience perception, international marketability, and brand consistency. Then came the line that stung more than the rest. "We kindly request that you remove the necklace during all future scenes to avoid further escalation." Zendaya read the sentence twice. Then once more. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with disappointment. It wasn't about a necklace anymore. It was about principle, about the line between professional boundaries and personal convictions, about whether one could be true to both their work and their faith. She took a breath, closed the email, and stood up. This time, she didn't go to Keller. She went straight to Janet. The producer was on the phone when Zendaya walked into the office, but the moment she saw her, she ended the call. "I saw it," Janet said softly. "Is it coming from you?" Zendaya asked. Janet shook her head. "It's coming from above me. The executive board is nervous. Sponsors, investors, you know how it goes." Zendaya nodded slowly. "So what happens if I say no?" Janet hesitated. "They haven't said yet, but I can guess. They'll claim breach of contract. They'll say you're introducing elements that weren't in the script. They might even try to pull you." Zendaya stayed silent for a moment, weighing every word. "I'm not trying to start a movement," she said. "I'm just trying not to erase myself to make other people comfortable." Janet stood up. "I know, and I believe in what you're doing. But if this goes further, it won't just be you on the line. The crew, the budget, the distribution, everything could be affected." Zendaya's voice was quiet but firm. "Then I guess they'll have to make a choice." The conversation ended there. Later that day, word spread quickly around the set. Some people avoided her. Others quietly voiced support. A few crew members even began wearing small pins, crosses, stars, moons, tucked subtly into their clothes. And then, as if the storm wasn't already heavy, the story made national headlines again, this time with a twist. A well-known tabloid released an article with the headline, "Zendaya threatened production over religious jewelry." The article twisted the narrative. It painted her as a diva, a troublemaker, someone who was risking millions over a personal preference. Comment sections exploded with rage, ridicule, and misinformation. News outlets picked it up. Some anchors scolded her for being unprofessional. Others defended her courage. Social media became a battlefield. Through it all, Zendaya didn't flinch. She showed up to set. She wore the cross. She did the work. But the pressure was undeniable. That night, after filming, she sat alone in her trailer. The silence was loud. She could feel the weight of every decision she'd made resting on her shoulders. That's when her phone buzzed. It was a message from an actor she deeply respected. Someone she'd never worked with before, but whose words carried weight across the industry. "Just saw the news. I've never said this publicly, but I admire your strength. Don't back down. We need people like you. No name, no signature, just words." But she knew who it was, and that was enough. Zendaya smiled faintly, closed her eyes, and whispered a short prayer of gratitude, not for the attention or the support, but for the strength to keep going. Because what she didn't know yet, what no one saw coming, was that this quiet resistance was about to lead to the most unexpected twist of all. 2 days later, Zendaya arrived at the studio to find the atmosphere changed. The usual rhythm of production was slower. People spoke in hushed tones, heads turning as she walked by. It wasn't discomfort this time. It was anticipation. Something was happening, and she didn't know what. Janet found her first. "They're calling an emergency meeting," she said. "Upstairs. Studio execs. Legal. Par." Zendaya raised an eyebrow. "Now." Janet nodded. "Now." She followed her through the back hallways of the studio, up a quiet stairwell, and into a large glass-walled conference room. Seated inside were at least 10 people, men and women in suits, tablets open, papers scattered. They barely acknowledged her as she entered, too focused on the storm they were trying to manage. Janet took a seat beside her. A man from PR started the meeting. "We'll keep this short," he said. "The situation with Zendaya has escalated significantly. It's now international. We're seeing coordinated campaigns online. People are calling for boycotts. Others are demanding support. Investors are nervous." He turned to her directly. "We need to understand your position, Zendaya. Clearly, publicly." She met his gaze without flinching. "My position hasn't changed," she said. "I'm not trying to make a statement. I'm not asking anyone to agree with me. I just won't remove something that matters to me, something that's part of who I am. Because it makes other people uncomfortable. The room went quiet. Then one of the legal advisors spoke. You understand the consequences if we move forward with the film as is? Zendaya nodded. I do. Janet spoke up then. Maybe we're asking the wrong question, she said. Maybe the question isn't whether Zendaya should change who she is to fit the film. Maybe the question is, what does it say about us if we ask her to? That shifted the room. The head of the studio, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. He was older, stern, not known for softness, but his voice was measured. I've been in this business 40 years, he said. I've seen egos, power plays, but this isn't that. This is someone standing still while the world tries to push her. He paused. Maybe we shouldn't be pushing. No one expected that. By the end of the meeting, the decision was made. Zendaya would continue filming with the cross. No further pressure. No edits. No conditions. When she returned to set that afternoon, the crew clapped as she walked in. Not all of them. Not loudly, but enough to make her stop and smile. It wasn't about the applause. It wasn't about winning. It was about holding the line when it would have been easier to let go. Weeks later, the film wrapped. Zendaya's performance was praised as one of the most powerful of her career. Critics noted her depth, rawness, and emotional clarity. None mentioned the cross, but audiences noticed, and they remembered. Fan messages poured in. Letters, emails, quiet thank yous from strangers who'd felt invisible in their own beliefs. One church youth group even started a campaign called Stand Like Zendaya, encouraging teens to embrace their values without fear. But for Zendaya, the biggest moment came at a private screening months later. She sat in the back row, unnoticed, watching the final cut on the big screen for the first time. And when scene 23 came on, the courtroom scene, the cross glinting gently in the light, she felt tears prick her eyes. Not because of the scene, but because of everything it took to keep it. The film ended. The lights came up. People stood, clapping, cheering. But she stayed in her seat, quiet, grateful. She thought of her grandmother, of the prayers, the nights, the necklace passed down through generations. And she whispered softly into the dark room, a promise carried only by the silence. I didn't let go. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Zendaya thought she had done the right thing. On set, standing her ground with quiet strength, she had respectfully refused to remove her cross necklace, a personal symbol of faith, love, and identity. It wasn't a stunt. It wasn't about rebellion. It was about staying true to herself in a moment that tested everything she believed in. But what she didn't expect was how quickly that decision would spiral into chaos. Within 24 hours, the headlines exploded. Zendaya sparks controversy over religious symbol on set. Actress refuses director's order, shuts down production. Hollywood diva or religious rebel? The headlines didn't tell the full story. They never do. In the blink of an eye, her quiet stand became front-page news, twisted into a narrative of defiance, arrogance, and conflict. Journalists who hadn't even been on set claimed she stormed off in protest. Others said she disrespected the production. Some even speculated that she had found religion just to create drama. The comment sections were even worse. Just another celebrity looking for attention. She thinks she's better than everyone else. Fire her. There are 1,000 other actresses waiting in line. Zendaya didn't reply. Not yet, but she read every word, every post, every lie. What hurt most wasn't the media frenzy. It was how fast people, some of whom had praised her just days before, turned their backs. People she had worked with for years suddenly stopped returning her calls. Invitations to industry events vanished. Sponsorship deals were postponed until further notice. Even her team, the people closest to her, began to panic. Maybe we should issue a statement, her manager said, pacing the room. Just something neutral. Calm things down. Zendaya shook her head. I'm not apologizing for who I am. Her voice was calm but firm. There was a storm inside her, sure, but she wasn't going to let it show. Not yet. That night, alone in her apartment, Zendaya sat in silence. She held the cross in her hands, the same one her grandmother had given her before passing away. It had always been a reminder of love, of home, of faith that guided her through the toughest times. And now, it had become a symbol of controversy. Was it worth it? The thought lingered longer than she expected. Because behind the fame, behind the followers and red carpets, Zendaya was human. She felt every blow, every betrayal, every friend who said nothing while she was dragged through the mud. And for the first time in years, she wondered if she could keep going. But just as the darkness crept in, her phone lit up. A message from an old acting coach. Someone she hadn't heard from in years. Don't let them change you. You're doing what most never have the courage to do. Keep going. She stared at the message, her eyes filling with tears. Not because of the words, but because someone still believed in her when the world didn't. And just like that, something inside her shifted. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to hide. If they were going to try to cancel her, fine. But they were going to hear her voice first. What started as a social media storm quickly turned into something darker. It wasn't just about public opinion anymore. The backlash Zendaya faced moved from impersonal headlines into deeply personal territory. The criticism sharpened, the hate grew louder, and the attacks became more vicious. Not just on her character, but on her values, her identity, and even her family. Every hour, new articles surfaced. Zendaya's faith-fueled meltdown? Insiders say actress is difficult and unprofessional behind the scenes. Is Hollywood done with Zendaya? And then came the anonymous sources. One tabloid claimed an unnamed co-star described her as emotionally unstable. Another said she had alienated everyone on set with her self-righteous attitude. None of it was true, but the damage was done. The public believed what was easiest to digest. Behind the scenes, Zendaya felt the ground shift under her feet. She started receiving strange emails, DMs filled with threats, people telling her she'd ruined her career. Others, much worse, mocking her faith, her upbringing, and her appearance. Her family tried to shield her. Her mother texted daily. Her brother offered to step in to respond publicly. But Zendaya insisted they stay out of it. I don't want you getting dragged into this, she said. I'll handle it. But the truth was she wasn't sure she could. For the first time since she was a teenager, Zendaya felt completely alone. The studios went quiet. Brand deals she had nurtured for years were reevaluating their partnership. Close colleagues, people she had supported through their own tough times, suddenly vanished. Even her team started avoiding direct eye contact during meetings. The silence screamed louder than any headline. At night, she couldn't sleep. She'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying everything, wondering if one moment, one decision, had really undone years of hard work and love poured into her craft. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't broken, but because the weight of it all had numbed her. Still, in the quietest hours, the same thought kept echoing in her mind. Why is staying true to myself such a threat to them? She wasn't hurting anyone. She hadn't disrespected anyone. She had only asked to keep wearing a symbol that mattered to her, quietly, without forcing on anyone. And yet, the world was acting like she had committed some unspeakable crime. One afternoon, as she walked through a side entrance to her apartment to avoid paparazzi, a young girl stopped her. She couldn't have been more than 12. Zendaya? The girl asked, her voice shaking. Zendaya nodded, trying to smile through exhaustion. I just wanted to say thank you for not taking off your necklace. My mom wears one too. She always says it gives her strength. When I saw what you did, I told her I want to be strong like that someday. Zendaya froze. It was the first time in weeks that anyone had looked at her like she was more than a headline. The girl didn't see a scandal. She saw courage. That night, Zendaya sat alone in her living room. No lights, no distractions, just her thoughts, and the blinking cursor on a blank screen. It had been weeks since she had spoken publicly. Her PR team begged her to let them craft a carefully worded statement, to take the edge off, to apologize without really apologizing. But Zendaya knew that wasn't her voice. So she started typing. She didn't know where it would end, but she knew exactly where to begin. I never wanted to be anyone's controversy. I just want to be honest. Word by word, she poured her truth into that document. The confusion, the anger, the heartbreak, and above all, the hope, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been told they had to shrink themselves to fit into a world that wasn't built for their full light. She wasn't writing a press release. She was writing a declaration. It was early morning when Zendaya hit post. No press release. No glossy magazine exclusive. Just a quiet, handwritten letter photographed in natural light and shared on her personal account. The caption read, "For anyone who's ever been told to dim their light, to make others comfortable." Within minutes, the internet erupted. At first, no one knew what to expect. After weeks of silence, many thought she'd backtrack, apologize, explain, smooth things over. But this wasn't damage control. It was something else entirely. The letter began softly. "I never wanted to be a headline. I never imagined that choosing to stay true to myself, without shame, without anger, would become a problem worth punishing." Zendaya's voice leapt off the page. It was calm, raw, and unapologetically human. She explained how the cross she wore wasn't a fashion statement or an act of rebellion. It was a promise to herself, a memory of her grandmother who taught her kindness and courage, a reminder that strength can be quiet, steady, and rooted in love. She didn't name names. She didn't lash out. Instead, she held up a mirror to the industry and to the world. We say we want authenticity. We celebrate individuality. But the moment it makes someone uncomfortable, we demand silence. We tell people to change, to hide, to become more marketable. That's not freedom. That's fear. As people read, something began to shift. By noon, the letter had been shared over 1 million times. Celebrities who had been silent now spoke out. Viola Davis reposted it, adding, "This is what strength looks like." Emma Watson tweeted, "Your grace is louder than their hate." Even icons like Oprah and Michelle Obama voiced their support, calling the letter a message we all needed to hear. The tide was turning. News outlets that once published clickbait headlines were now quoting the letter line by line. Some issued quiet corrections. Others simply pivoted, writing think pieces about Zendaya's bravery and the importance of spiritual freedom in modern media. But the most powerful reactions weren't from celebrities or journalists. They were from regular people, young artists who had been told to hide their beliefs, teachers who had been asked to remove personal symbols from classrooms, nurses, flight attendants, students, thousands of messages from people who felt the same pressure to shrink, to blend in, to erase something sacred just to be accepted. Zendaya read every message she could. Some made her cry. Others made her laugh. All of them made her realize one thing. She hadn't just taken a stand for herself. She had become a voice for a silent majority. People who had carried their convictions quietly, afraid of being misunderstood or rejected. That night, she received a call. It was from the director of the project she had originally walked onto set for, the one who had asked her to remove the cross in the first place. His voice was low, careful. "I read your letter," he said. "I didn't understand until now. I'm sorry." There was a pause. "We'd like to invite you back." Zendaya didn't answer right away. Not because she was uncertain, but because she understood something deeper now. This moment was never about returning to that one project. It was about rewriting the script completely. Later that week, she appeared on a live panel discussing the experience. Calm and composed, she spoke not with bitterness, but with vision. "I didn't post a letter to start a fight," she said. "I posted it to open a door, one that should have never been closed in the first place." And maybe that was what made it all so powerful. She never shouted, never accused, never demanded revenge. She simply told the truth. And in doing so, she broke the silence in a way no one else could. By the end of the week, the hashtag Stand With Zendaya had reached every corner of the internet. Schools used her letter as reading material. Podcasts dissected it. Churches, yoga groups, even corporate workshops discussed its message. But to Zendaya, the most powerful moment came quietly, one evening at home, when her phone buzzed again. It was a photo, a group of young girls, all wearing necklaces with small crosses, holding up a handmade sign that said, "Thank you for not hiding. Now we won't either." Zendaya smiled, tears in her eyes. She had set out to defend a necklace, but what she had really defended was the right to be whole. The world didn't change overnight. There were no fireworks, no dramatic public apologies from major executives, no viral videos of studio heads bending the knee. But something was shifting, slowly, quietly, like the ground adjusting beneath the surface after a long storm. Zendaya could feel it. Calls started coming in. Carefully worded emails filled her inbox, some from producers who had once distanced themselves, others from former collaborators expressing subtle support without drawing too much attention. "Just wanted to say your letter meant a lot. We were wrong to stay quiet. You reminded me why I got into this business in the first place." There were no grand gestures, no press conferences, just small, real acknowledgments, some public, most private, but each one chipped away at the wall that had been built around her. Behind the scenes, the dominoes were starting to fall. Studios that had put her projects on hold suddenly became eager to move forward. Contracts once threatened with quiet cancellations were now being reactivated, with better terms. A major director who had once passed her over called to say, "I misjudged you. Let's talk again." And then came the shift that caught everyone off guard. People started talking, really talking. Writers, costume designers, lighting techs, people in the industry who were rarely heard, began sharing their own stories of being told to hide who they were. One by one, testimonies flooded private forums and then spilled out into public spaces. A Jewish cinematographer tweeted, "I was once told to tuck my star David under my shirt for neutrality." Zendaya's story reminded me that silence doesn't protect you. It just delays a fight. A Muslim actress shared, "I wore hijab during rehearsal and was told I'd intimidate the audience. I stayed quiet. I wish I hadn't." And these weren't isolated voices. They were echoes of a much larger truth. The entertainment industry had built an empire on stories, but was afraid of the ones that were real. Zendaya's stand, what had been labeled controversial weeks before, was now a mirror reflecting the quiet censorship so many had accepted as normal. It was never just about a cross. It was about the invisible lines drawn around identity. And now, those lines were starting to blur. One moment crystallized a shift. Zendaya was invited to a panel on authenticity in media. It wasn't the usual red carpet affair. No flash, no glamour. Just a round-table conversation, streamed live, with artists from every background. When it was her turn to speak, the room went silent. "I didn't ask to lead anything," she said. "I didn't post a letter to start a trend. I spoke up because I didn't want to spend one more day shrinking myself to fit into someone else's idea of professional. I've done that. We all have. And I think we're done." The moderator, a respected industry journalist, nodded. "You've sparked something real. Have you felt a change?" Zendaya paused. "It's not loud," she said. "It's not easy to measure. But yes, I feel it. I feel people breathing a little deeper. I feel eyes meeting mine that used to look away. I feel doors opening. Not because I forced them open, but because people are realizing they were closed to begin with." Applause wasn't allowed on the panel, but the silence afterwards spoke louder than any standing ovation. Later that week, an unexpected gesture caught her attention. The studio where everything had started, the set where she'd been asked to remove her cross, issued a quiet but public policy update, a formal statement affirming their commitment to respecting all cultural and religious expressions on set. It didn't mention her by name, but everyone knew why it had changed. Zendaya didn't comment. She didn't need to. Instead, she kept moving forward, choosing projects that aligned with her values, creating space for younger artists to be seen, to be heard, to be whole. She founded a new mentorship program focused on authenticity in performance, storytelling, and self-expression. More than ever, she was in control of her voice, her brand, her message, not because the world gave her permission, but because she took it back. One evening, after a long day of work, she walked into a quiet cafe and noticed something that made her smile. A young barista behind the counter, maybe 19, wore a tiny silver cross necklace, out in the open, not hidden, not tucked away. He caught her looking and smiled shyly. "Thanks for giving people like me the courage," he said. Zendaya blinked, surprised. "I didn't do anything special," she replied. "You were just honest. And sometimes that's the most radical thing you can be." Months had passed. The headlines faded. The hashtag slowed. The frenzy that once surrounded Zendaya's name calmed like waves settling after storm. But something far more powerful remained. Not in the trending topics or press coverage, but in the undercurrent of cultural change she had ignited. Zendaya didn't just weather a storm. She redefined what it meant to stand firm in a world built on compromise. Everywhere she went, echoes of her boldness followed. She could feel in the way people looked at her during interviews, not with scrutiny, but with a kind of quiet reverence. Her presence now carried a weight, not of celebrity, but of leadership. She hadn't asked for that role, but she had earned it. At the next major award ceremony, Zendaya was nominated for a performance filmed after her public stand. Ironically, it was the same project she had been nearly removed from, the same set where everything had begun. When she arrived, the energy in the room shifted, not because of her dress or the cameras flashing, but because everyone knew she had changed the conversation. When her name was called Best Lead Performance, the applause wasn't just about talent. It was for resilience, for authenticity, for grace under pressure. As she stood on stage, award in hand, she paused. "Months ago, I was told to hide a part of myself," she began, her voice steady. "Not because it was wrong, but because it made people uncomfortable. I almost believed them. But then I remembered something my grandmother used to say. You don't need permission to be who you are, just courage." She glanced at the crowd, a sea of faces, some tearful, others proud. So this isn't just a thank you speech. It's a reminder to anyone who's ever felt like they had to choose between success and self. You don't. You can be both. You deserve to be both. The room erupted, but the real impact happened after the camera stopped rolling. In the weeks that followed, a quiet movement began to rise. Young actors and actresses started speaking openly about their identities, religious, cultural, personal. Production crews began adjusting policies to allow for greater expression on set. Casting directors became more mindful. Writers started crafting stories that embraced, rather than erased, real-life layers. Zendaya received letters from around the world. Students, teachers, artists, even parents who had struggled to support their children's need to belong and believe. One stood out. It came from a young woman in Kenya. "I wore my necklace outside my school uniform for the first time today. I was afraid at first, but then I remember what you did. I realize I'm not alone. I don't have to shrink. Thank you for showing me." Zendaya held on to that letter for days. It reminded her that courage doesn't always come in the form of speeches or spotlights. Sometimes it looks like a quiet act of defiance, a necklace worn proudly, a truth spoken gently but firmly, a refusal to let fear dictate your identity. Her journey wasn't without scars. There were relationships that never healed, projects she never returned to, opportunities forever lost. But what she gained was something far greater than roles or awards. She had created space for honesty, for imperfection, for real human strength. And perhaps that was a legacy she never expected to leave. Not just as an actress or a fashion icon or a cultural figure, but as a woman who reminded the world that authenticity is not a weakness. It's a power, a quiet power that doesn't shout. It simply endures. And that endurance is what changes everything. The lights dimmed, the music paused, and for a brief moment, the entire room held its breath. It was the biggest night of the year. The prestigious Global Artist Awards, where the entertainment industry gathered not just to celebrate performance, but to crown icons. And that year, one name had dominated every conversation leading up to the ceremony: Zendaya. She wasn't just nominated, she was expected to win. But this night wasn't just about a trophy. It wasn't even about recognition. For Zendaya, this was a night she had carried in her heart for months. The moment where silence would end and her truth would finally be spoken on the biggest stage of her life. She knew the cameras were ready. The media had hinted at an emotional moment, speculating that Zendaya might deliver a speech that would address everything. The backlash, the letter, the movement, the transformation. What they didn't know was how deeply personal this speech would be. Weeks before, she had been approached by the award show's producers. They asked, gently but cautiously, if she intended to bring up her past conflict with the industry. She'd smiled politely. "I'll speak from the heart," she said. "That's all I can promise." Now, sitting at her table near the front of the ballroom, surrounded by nominees, executives, and cameras flashing in every direction, she felt the weight of that promise. The golden envelope for Best Artist of the Year sat in the hands of a legendary actress on stage. And the winner is... A pause. Zendaya. The crowd burst into applause. A standing ovation followed. But Zendaya didn't move right away. She looked down at the small cross around her neck, the one that had once almost cost her everything, and now was shining under the stage lights. She closed her eyes briefly, placed a hand over it, then stood. Her steps to the stage were slow, measured, almost dreamlike. She smiled at familiar faces. Some were clapping with genuine pride, others with polite distance. But she wasn't here for approval. Not anymore. She took the microphone, award in one hand, silence in the other. For a moment, she just stood there, looking out at the crowd, at the same industry that had once tried to silence her. The same room where, not long ago, she might have smiled, given a polished speech, thanked her agents, her fan, her cast, and walked away. But not tonight. Tonight was different. "I wasn't sure I would make it back here," she began softly, her voice low and steady. "Not because of the competition, but because I almost let this place convince me that who I am wasn't welcome." The room froze. There it was. She wasn't reading from a teleprompter. There were no cue cards. This wasn't rehearsed. It was real, raw, vulnerable, powerful. She continued, her hands trembling just slightly. "There was a time, not that long ago, when I thought maybe I didn't belong in this industry anymore. That being true to myself, to my faith, to the people and stories that shaped me, made me too complicated, too inconvenient, too much." She glanced down for a second, gathering her breath. "But then I remembered what I do, what we do. It's not about making people comfortable. It's about telling the truth. And the truth is, I almost quit. I almost gave in. But something stopped me. A memory. A voice. My grandmother's voice." Gasps echoed softly. A few people wiped their eyes already. She told me, "Your light isn't meant to be hidden, even if it hurts their eyes." The room fell into deeper stillness. Zendaya's voice cracked slightly, but she held firm. "So, tonight, this isn't just an award. It's a reminder. That truth has a place here. That courage has a place here. That faith in all its forms deserves space to exist, even in the spotlight." As she spoke, a few audience members began to cry, quietly but visibly, not from sadness, but from the weight of recognition, of resonance, of finally hearing something that hadn't been said out loud in that space before. She looked directly into the camera now. And if someone watching this is wondering whether they have to choose between being accepted and being authentic, I want you to know you don't. You never did. You never will. A pause. Her final words came not with a shout, but a whisper. "Thank you for seeing me. All of me." The crowd didn't just applaud. They stood. All of them. Some clapped with trembling hands. Some simply covered their mouths in awe. Others wiped away tears they didn't expect to shed. The camera cut to familiar faces, veteran actors, directors, producers, visibly moved, many speechless. Zendaya stepped back from the mic. No dramatic gestures. No fake smiles. Just quiet grace and a legacy unfolding before their eyes. Backstage, the sound of celebration echoed like thunder through the walls. Music swelled. Presenters rehearsed their lines one last time. Assistants rushed past, earpieces buzzing. Stylists adjusted gowns and tuxedos with trembling fingers. The air was electric, filled with nerves, ambition, and spectacle. But just down a quiet hallway, away from the lights and the noise, Zendaya sat completely still. No entourage, no camera crew, just her. She had asked to be alone in her dressing room before the ceremony began. The door was closed, the lights dimmed low, and the only sound was the ticking of a small antique clock on the wall. In her hands was a worn, leather-bound journal, her grandmother's. She had brought it with her tonight, tucked safely into her bag like a compass. Its pages were filled with handwritten quotes, notes from church sermons, stories from her youth. Zendaya flipped through them slowly, fingertips brushing ink faded by time. One passage stood out, one she had read 100 times before, but tonight it felt heavier, louder. You don't find courage in comfort. You find it in the fire, where you're forced to choose between hiding and standing tall. And if your voice shakes, speak anyway. Zendaya closed the book. Her heart was pounding, not from fear of the crowd or the cameras or the possibility of winning. No, it was something deeper. The weight of knowing what she was about to say could echo far beyond that ballroom, that it would reach people she'd never meet, in places she'd never go, that it might be remembered not for what it awarded, but for what it awakened. She stood and walked to the mirror. For a moment, she simply looked at herself, not the polished actress, not the fashion icon, not the brand, just Zendaya, the girl from Oakland, the daughter of 2 teachers, the granddaughter of a woman who never had a spotlight, but whose wisdom lit the way for generations. The same girl who had once sat at the back of a church, clutching her grandmother's hand, listening to the power of words that could move hearts without raising a single voice. She looked down at the small gold cross around her neck. It rested just beneath her collarbone, quiet, unassuming, but full of history. The same necklace she had refused to take off when asked. The same one that sparked outrage, then solidarity, then something like a revolution. She touched it gently. "You're with me?" she whispered. A knock at the door broke the silence. 2 minutes, Miss Zendaya." She inhaled slowly, exhaled even slower. Everything was ready, but she wasn't. Because how could you be ready to carry not just your truth, but the weight of everyone who had ever felt invisible for simply being themselves? She opened her clutch and pulled out a folded note. Not the speech she was expected to give, the safe, polished version prepared by publicists, but the real one, the one she had written in the dark when no one was watching, the one that made her cry as she wrote it. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, from reverence. She thought of the young girl who had stopped her in the street weeks ago, who wore a similar necklace and whispered, "I want to be strong like you." She thought of the barista, the nurse, the teacher, the thousands of voices that had flooded her messages, sharing stories they had never dared speak aloud. She wasn't just speaking for them tonight. She was speaking with them. The door opened again. Time to go. As Zendaya walked the hallway toward the stage, the world seemed to blur. It wasn't nerves, it was purpose. Each step felt like a heartbeat, steady and certain. She could hear the host reading off nominees. Applause, laughter, a moment of anticipation. Then her name. The thunder of applause shook the room. But in her heart, there was silence, a calm clarity she had never felt before. She stepped onto the stage, holding the letter in one hand and the truth in the other. And as the room fell still and every camera zoomed in, she stood not as performer, but as a messenger, not to entertain, but to reveal. There was a pause. Not the kind of pause that fills awkward silence, but the kind that holds gravity. The kind that makes people stop chewing, stop blinking, stop pretending they aren't leaning in to hear what's about to come next. Zendaya stood at the center of the stage, clutching the award in one hand, the folded paper in the other. Her dress shimmered under the stage lights, elegant but unpretentious. Her expression was calm, more like someone standing at a threshold than a spotlight. She looked down at the note in her hand, then slowly set it aside. She wasn't going to read it. She was going to speak it from memory, from the soul. "I wasn't always proud of my voice," she began softly, her word hanging in the still air. "I used to think that silence was safety, that if I didn't speak, I couldn't be misunderstood, that if I just played the part well enough, I could protect what mattered most to me." A few people shifted in their seats, sensing where she was going. But then something happened. I was asked to remove something from myself. Something small, something symbolic, but something sacred. A necklace, a belief, a piece of me. And I realized silence wasn't protecting me. It was erasing me. The audience held their breath. I didn't make a scene. I didn't scream. I didn't storm off set. I just said, no. Zendaya's voice didn't waver. It grew. That no changed everything. Not because of how loud it was, but because it came from a place I had hidden for too long. A place we're told to tuck away if we want to be accepted, respected, professional. She paused, scanning the room, not accusing, but inviting, holding the crowd in the palm of her hand. And I'm not just talking about faith, she continued. I'm talking about truth, whatever it looks like for you. The part of you that doesn't fit into boxes, that doesn't make people comfortable, that doesn't shrink on command. A tear rolled down the cheek of a producer in the front row. Several others lowered their heads. There's this idea in our world that if you want to be seen, you have to soften your edges. Tone it down. Smile more. Apologize for what makes you different. But what if the thing you're being asked to hide is exactly what someone else needs to see? Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed forward. I got letters. From students, from nurses, from baristas, from fathers, from daughters. People who said they'd never spoken their truth aloud, until they saw me keep mine on. A murmur swept through the crowd, an emotional sigh, the release of hell breath. One message said, I didn't know I was allowed to exist like this. That broke me, and then it built me. She wiped a tear away, but didn't lose her momentum. We are told that vulnerability is weakness, but I've learned it's the most unshakable strength there is. Because when you are real, fully unapologetically real, no one can take that from you. At this point, the cameras capture the audience. People crying openly, not performative tears. Real ones, deep ones. Zendaya took a final breath. I'm grateful for this award, but I'm more grateful for the moment that forced me to ask myself who I really am. And the answer wasn't found in applause. It was found in stillness, in silence, in standing up quietly and choosing me again and again. She held up the cross on her necklace, not as a statement, but as a symbol. This is not just about me. It never was. It's about all of us who have ever been told to disappear. I'm here to say you don't have to. Then, with a whisper, you're already enough. For a moment, there was nothing. No applause. No movement. Just the raw, shared humanity in the room. And then the wave. It began in the back, clapping. Then the middle. Then the front. Until the entire ballroom was on its feet. People cheering, crying, holding hands, hugging strangers. A sound that wasn't just a performance. It was for truth. Cameras panned across the audience. The host had tears in their eyes. Artists who had built entire careers on resilience were now being reminded what it felt like to be seen. Backstage, crew members were wiping their eyes. Online, the moment was already viral. Zendaya's speech is the soul of the awards. A moment that will be remembered for decades. From actress to icon, Zendaya's evolution is complete. But she wasn't thinking about any of that. As Zendaya walked off stage, she felt light, not because the weight was gone, but because she had finally learned to carry it with grace. Before the lights had even dimmed again, before the next presenter had reached the podium, Zendaya's words were already traveling. By the time she stepped backstage, her speech had been clipped, posted, and shared by every major outlet, influencer, and celebrity in the room. And not just in a, wow, great speech kind of way. It was different. Her voice had pierced something deeper. It didn't trend. It moved. Within minutes, the video had millions of views. On social media, hashtags bloomed like wildflowers. Hashtag Zendaya Truth. Hashtag you don't have to hide. Hashtag already enough. People didn't just share the speech. They began sharing themselves. A young teacher in South Africa posted a video. I've hidden who I am at work for years. Today, I wore the ring my grandmother gave me. Thank you, Zendaya. A nurse in Brazil wrote, I stopped covering my tattoo. It's not unprofessional. It's part of my story. A teenage boy in Tennessee came out to his parents, quoting her final words. You don't have to disappear. The ripple was real. At universities, professors paused lectures to talk about the speech. In offices, managers played it during morning meetings to open up conversations around identity and belonging. Church groups, theater groups, LGBTQ plus organizations, and youth centers began organizing truth circles inspired by Zendaya's message. Spaces where people could say out loud the things they've been afraid to admit. One bookstore in New York printed the speech and placed copies in envelopes labeled, Take One. Be seen. Zendaya didn't ask for this movement, but her truth gave people permission to speak their own. Meanwhile, the entertainment industry, the same one that had once tried to silence her, began to shift uncomfortably under the weight of the moment. Studios held emergency PR meetings. Brands that had quietly distanced themselves suddenly remembered their public values. But the public was paying attention now. This time, authenticity wasn't a trend. It was a standard. Zendaya herself kept quiet in the hours following the speech. She didn't post. She didn't retweet. She didn't speak to the press. She sat in her hotel room, barefoot on the balcony, sipping tea and watching the sunrise. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from old friends, family, people she hadn't spoken to in years, but also from strangers. One stood out, a young actress, just breaking into the industry, messaged, I was told I had to change my name, lose weight, and tone down my spirituality. I almost did. Then I saw you. Thank you. You saved me before they could erase me. Zendaya cried, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she understood. Every tear, every breath, every moment of doubt in the past year had led to this, to impact, the kind that doesn't just trend, it roots itself in people. 2 days later, she was invited to appear on a global news program. She accepted, not to promote herself, but to give voice to those who had written her. On air, she didn't talk about the award. She talked about the girl who had written about wearing her grandmother's ring, the teacher, the boy from Tennessee, the actress trying not to disappear. I don't want to be the face of anything, she said. I just want people to know that they don't need to be less to be loved. That quote hit harder than expected. It landed on magazine covers, on billboards, on coffee mugs, tattoos, handmade signs. But more than that, it landed in hearts, in boardrooms, in school assemblies, in families that hadn't spoken in years. One viral moment became a movement, and Zendaya, with every step she took afterward, didn't try to lead it. She protected it. She used her platform to amplify others. She reposted artists telling their stories. She spoke at universities and quietly funded scholarship for young creatives who felt like outcasts. She launched a mentorship circle called Unhidden, pairing newcomers with established artists who had chosen truth over conformity. Even more powerfully, she began producing, not just acting, with a new mission: tell the stories that the world had once been afraid to tell. In one interview, when asked what success looked like to her now, she didn't hesitate. Success is knowing I helped someone stay whole. And perhaps that's why her speech didn't just touch people. It changed them, because it wasn't about spotlight. It was about permission. Permission to cry, to believe, to wear what matters, to speak what hurts, to not shrink. The world hadn't seen a speech like that in decades, and it may be decades before it sees another one like it. The world eventually moved on, as it always does. Award shows faded into memory. New scandals stole the headlines. The internet turned its attention elsewhere, but something remained, something deeper, something that couldn't be undone. Zendaya's speech had planted roots. And while the media chased the next big moment, real change, quiet, steady, human, was beginning to bloom. In the weeks that followed the ceremony, Zendaya received thousands of letters. Not emails, not DMs, real letters, handwritten, some tear-stained, others filled with artwork, poetry, prayers. Stories of people who had found themselves in her words, who had reclaimed parts of themselves they thought were lost forever. She read each one slowly, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, sometimes sitting in silence for long stretches after finishing a single paragraph. But one letter arrived that she kept beside her bed. It was from a little girl in Chicago. Dear Zendaya, I'm 11 years old. I wore my hair natural today for the first time and didn't feel ugly. When I got scared, I thought about your necklace and your voice shaking and how you still stood tall. I want to be like that. Zendaya didn't need an award to feel the weight of that moment. She had won something far greater. And so, she began her next chapter not in front of cameras, but in the rooms that mattered most, rooms without lights, without applause, but filled with possibility. She launched the Unhidden Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to empowering young artists to embrace their full identities. It provided mentorships, scholarships, creative grants, and safe spaces for marginalized voices in film, music, dance, and theater. The mission was clear. You don't have to choose between being seen and being real. At the Foundation's launch event, Zendaya didn't speak from a stage. She sat in a circle with a group of young girls, some wearing hijabs, some with braids, others with scars, shyness, brilliance, and all of them glowing. They didn't ask for autographs. They asked questions. Were you scared when they tried to cancel you? She smiled. Yes, she said, but sometimes you have to be scared and do it anyway. Another girl asked, what made you speak up? Zendaya paused. My grandmother's voice, she answered, hand on her necklace. And then my own. That's the thing about legacy. It's not built in standing ovations or viral moments. It's built in the quiet, invisible places. In the life you help someone else believe they can have. As the years passed, Zendaya continued to rise, not just in her career, but in her purpose. She directed films that challenged old systems. She wrote a memoir about faith, fear, and finding her voice. She produced a documentary that followed the ripple of her speech through different parts of the world, from schools in rural towns to refugee camps, where people who had never seen her shows had somehow seen her anyway. And yet, she never stopped returning to stillness. One night, long after the world had stopped talking about the speech, Zendaya found herself walking through the neighborhood where she grew up. No cameras, no glam, just sneakers and a hoodie and the hum of streetlights buzzing above. She passed an old church where her grandmother used to take her. The doors were open for a community event. Inside, a group of kids sat in a circle, reading aloud. She stood at the door for a moment, unnoticed. One girl was reading softly from a printed sheet of paper. You don't need to be less to be loved. You're already enough. Zendaya froze. She knew those words. The girl looked up and saw her. Her mouth fell open slightly, but she didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply smiled, a knowing smile. The kind that says, thank you, I see you, and I believe I can now. Zendaya smiled back. And for once, she didn't feel like a celebrity. She felt like a lantern someone had passed to the next traveler on the road. As she walked back into the night, stars above and city below, she whispered quietly into the air, we did it, Grandma. We really did it.